Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. My name is James, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here, especially on such a warm and sunny day, at least if you're in London, Ontario. So thanks for joining yet another Zoom meeting instead of raking your lawn, I guess, or whatever else we might be able to do outside on a great day like this. Like everyone else, I am really, I look forward to the days when we can have these kind of conversations over a pint on the grad club patio. And that was definitely originally the plan when we started working on this CAS lab project back in this 2019. But here we are. So thanks for rolling with it with us. A couple of kind of housekeeping notes off the bat, a couple items to make note of. First of all, this Zoom meeting is also simultaneously broadcasting live on YouTube. And so I just mentioned that in case it has any implications for any wardrobe or background considerations that you may want to take into account. There's no obligation to participate audibly or visually if you don't want to. So yeah, don't feel any compulsion. Our structure for this meeting is lightning talks, which are 5 to 10 minute presentations occurring in rapid succession. We've asked each presenter to really pack a lot into a small amount of time. And so we're going to hold all the questions that come up until the end, and then have a time at the end of our meeting to have some conversation around points or ideas or questions that come up as we go. If you'd like to indicate that you do have a question for the Q&A, we'll use the raise your hand Zoom function, and then by the time we get to Q&A, we'll have a ready-made list of everyone who has a question that they'd like to bring forward. So yeah, we'll use the raise hand for the Q&A. Always helps to work through the presentation you made. Here's a kind of list of as you know, kind of where we're going, and we're privileged and honored that Jackie Burkell has come to share a few words from Research Western as we begin. So Jackie, I will turn it over to you.
There, I'm unmuted now. I'm privileged and honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love the work that the Complex Adaptive Systems Lab does, and I love the fact that you've been around since 2019. I think that's really exciting. It's really clear to me that so many of the problems that we're facing now, the issues that we're facing now, need a collaborative approach, and they need a complex systems approach. Things like we were just briefly discussing water before this meeting started. And I know I've been in discussions with a group on campus who are interested in sustainability. I'm doing some work right now myself on technologically facilitated violence against women in particular. And in each of these cases, and in so many others, what I recognize is that we have a complex interactive system, and complex and adaptive and interactive system of players and conditions and situations that require us to think about the issue in a very different way, which is why I'm so excited about what's happening here, because that's what you're doing. So I'm sure that the work that's conducted by members of this lab will align well with directions that are emerging from our strategic plan. We don't know yet what those directions will be, but we can be absolutely certain, given the nature of the world that we're living right now, that the issues that we highlight and focus on are going to be the kinds of problems to which complex adaptive systems provide terrific insight. So with that, and a final remark, that I was just on another Zoom call, we were talking about Zoom courts and the fact that court decorum had fallen apart because people were forgetting their microphones were on and their cameras were on. I love that note that you made, James, about, yes, we can turn those off, or just remember. With that, I'll turn it over to back to you, James. And again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to these.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you so much for everything that you and your office has done to help facilitate and support and collaborate with this moving forward. So our first lightning talk presentation will be Sarah Cristancu from the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. So I will turn it over to you, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, James. I'm very excited to be here and to be able to share with you some of the work that we've been doing with my group, particularly on the topic of swarm intelligence as one aspect of complex adaptive systems and in relation to how we're thinking about teamwork in healthcare. Here's the reality. The nature of teamwork in healthcare is changing rapidly, and contributing factors include things like the prevalence of chronic conditions, the scopes of practice that are becoming blurred, and also interprofessional dynamics. And these features can challenge teams to find common direction, particularly, I think, if we keep thinking and talking about teams simply as a collection of individuals. I'm an engineer by training, and I tend to look at problems from a systems perspective rather than from individual parts. And this perspective is what drives my interest in what I call collective adaptation. So using that systems perspective, I recently became interested in using principles of swarm intelligence, which is the field of how social insects like ants behave, as an alternative analogy to think about teamwork in healthcare. As it turns out, social insects have been adapting for millions of years through all kinds of change and disruptions. We still have social insects kicking around these days, which means that they have managed to adapt successfully, I think even better than us humans. So why not trying to see if we can learn something from them? And the good news is that other industries have largely started to embrace this shifting paradigm. Construction crews, military SWAT teams, and recent approaches to radiology diagnosis are embracing, for instance, forms of communication that until now were only ascribed to social insects. But let me give you a quick synopsis of what swarm intelligence is about. The main idea in swarm intelligence is that a solution to a problem emerges as a result of the collective action of the members of the swarm, not the individual action. And this collective action is achieved through 4 key principles. First is the principle of communication. So swarms use both direct and indirect communication. For direct communication, for instance, we humans use language. Social insects use touch. Let's say ants, they use their antenna to communicate with each other. For indirect communication, humans favor body language and gestures. However, in the absence of body language, social insects rely on leaving traces in the environment that can drive the behavior of others. So for instance, if more ants are needed to pick up food, the first group in finding the food leave a type of pheromones, which is a chemical molecule on the ground that other ants use to know where to go and get the food. And those pheromones are the traces in this case. These forms of communication facilitate the second principle of swarm intelligence, which is awareness, or the ability of the collective to remain attuned to its local surroundings. So once the swarm figures out the environment it is working within through awareness, the third principle, called self-determination, is used to perform the work. Self-determination means that while each individual is working on a particular task, they're also paying attention to potential disruptions in the work. So they're able to deal with it as it happens without having to adhere to rigid hierarchies or central control. But here's a disclaimer. I'm not saying that there is no leadership and that each individual behaves randomly. What I'm saying is that they use a different kind of leadership, which is called distributed leadership. So taking together communication, both direct and indirect, awareness and self-determination, realize the most important feature of swarm intelligence. That is the ability of swarm members to be interchangeable so that an individual currently performing one task can replace another individual performing another task. And in this way, the collective exhibits the fourth principle, which is self-healing behavior. Self-healing is best recognized when the swarm continues to perform, even if an individual is lost or is not available, because in swarm intelligence, no individual is irreplaceable. So in this way, self-healing enhances the ability of the swarm to cope with failure and to adapt to changes in the environment, and hence, self-healing becomes the catalyst for collective adaptation. So out of those principles, we have explored the one about trace-based communication in healthcare teams. And we have found that members of clinical teams, in fact, use traces as well, maybe not as intentionally as ants do, but the reality is that the environment in healthcare is full of objects that we tend to use to communicate with each other. For instance, those bands that patients use in hospitals, or maybe if you've been in a neonatology unit, the butterfly sticker that you see sometimes when a baby is in a critical condition to indicate to the people who are coming to be careful with their conversations. So through this investigation, we have found that this kind of communication seems to be driven by three apparent purposes: promoting efficiency, preventing mistakes, or saving face. And if you're interested in the details of the study, it is already published in BMJ Open. After we figured out that healthcare teams use traces as a communication strategy, our next curiosity became whether or not they could also enact the capacity for self-healing. So that's what we're doing now. And this research is in progress and involves exploring self-healing across multiple industries. And my goal is to see whether we can learn in healthcare teams from these teams that seem to embrace self-healing successfully. So far, with what we have done, we have learned that what makes these teams successful at self-healing entails three key ingredients. One, self-healing teams follow the rule of getting things done regardless of who does it. Since they are all focused on the same goal, they don't get stuck in arguing about who should be doing what or who's more important than whom. They just see what needs to be done and they do it. And this is a behavior we observed, for instance, in police SWAT teams. So if something incapacitates number two in the team knows that they have to make sure that another team member takes on that person's role to ensure that everybody remains alive. And that happens without number one, means the leader, having to say anything. Two, self-healing teams effectively capitalize on distributed leadership. These teams adopt a cross-training mindset to help each other learn how to fill in the gaps if they lose a team member. It doesn't matter if you're the leader or not. What matters is that everybody is ready to step up if needed. For instance, we observed this behavior in pre-hospital resuscitation teams that are made up of whoever is available. Sometimes you have or you don't have paramedics, fire, police, students, but they are able to quickly swap the leadership role. So if something happens, they can get back to work as soon as possible. And three, self-healing teams quickly realize the limits of their own expertise and seek help. These teams understand that when things go awry, there is no place for people with big egos. They know that they must call out bad behavior. And if you are the one being called out, you better check it out fast so that the team continues to operate as a cohesive unit. In military healthcare teams, sometimes, for instance, a medic who has more deployment experience is the person who knows to troubleshoot, sometimes even better than even the surgeon. And that's fine, because these teams are willing to accept that someone with less professional pedigree might possess the skill needed at a critical moment. Finally, as collective self-healing is not a natural trait in humans, as it is in insects, we know that it must be nurtured and it must be developed. So our hope is that the research we are right now conducting will provide the necessary insights to inform team training for this particular skill. And moving forward, these are the kinds of questions that we are interested in exploring next. And with that, I would like to end. Thank you everybody for your attention, and I will pass it on to James.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fantastic. And next time I'm in the hospital, I'm thinking to myself, how is this hospital like an anthill? That was awesome. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Slobodan from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you and share some of the interesting work we are doing in modeling complex systems. The topic today will be brief introduction of something that's named Global Change Explorer, the publicly available web-based tool for exploring the impacts of global change. I think for this audience, kind of introducing global change is not something very new, but when we talk about global change, I keep in mind the change that's occurring within the kind of population, both growth and migrations of the population, change that's occurring in the kind of land use area, especially switch from agriculture to urbanized land or switch from the forest to agricultural land. And finally, very big issue of changing climate. The reason for the focus on the global change is that the impacts are spread all around the kind of infrastructure, both hard and soft. Our water infrastructure, energy, transportation, communications, everything is kind of affected by these globally changing conditions. But we quite often forget that soft infrastructure like institutions, social organizations, even the culture is also being subject to these globally changing conditions. And the final outcome is that if we are trying to assess the impacts of global change, we are facing the very significant increase in the complexity of the problems we are trying to solve, as well as the uncertainty involved in their formulation and solution. I'll give you just a bit of history of this work. I assume that no one at this call is old enough to remember the 1970s and publication of the seminal work of the group from MIT and the development of the world model that was looking into limitations to growth. That work ended up with a book, The Limits to Growth. You see the book on the right-hand side. The book, I think, reached approximately 32 million copies. It was translated in about 30, 40 languages, and it was probably one of the scientific books that reached the maximum popularity. I was a graduate student at the University of California at that time, and I got an assignment in the course to read the book and write the essay. I did it. I got a pretty good mark, but I was left with a very, very large question. And the question was, how come that when we are considering the limits of the growth, we are not considering water? The world model didn't have anything to do with water. And I think that stuck in my mind as one of the really important questions to address. So yes, I came back to this particular question. First, I took the model of the limits to growth, the world model. I added the water to it, and I resimulated all the scenarios that the book was based on. And I think I successfully proved that water can modify them all. Much later on, I also continued the development of our own model that was built kind of having in mind the concept of the world model, but focusing the interaction between sectors in a very different way, putting the water quantity, quality, supply, demand, and everything else in the center, and then linking it to other sectors. That work on the development of that model, that's right now in the version 3, also ended up in this publicly available tool that I am going to kind of show today. Just to quickly show you, this was the beginning, the modification of the world model. World model had all these sectors from industrial, food production, pollution, and so on. And all what I have done, I kind of added this water quantity and non-renewable and renewable, and then on the right-hand side, you see the simulations. These are the traditional simulations of the scenarios published in the book, and the follow-up book, Beyond the Limits. 12 different scenarios, and almost each of them were dramatically affected by the water, pointing out that especially water quality is one of the really significant issues on the global scale. And then much later, the development of the ANEMI model, our original model, started. It was supported by the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada through a number of different grants. I really appreciate the strategic grant that gave us opportunity to work in an interdisciplinary team with a group of very significant partners that helped shape the model, and basically support the idea of developing a system-based model of society, biosphere, climate system that would help communication between the science and policy. So the members of the team, all from different groups, you can see economics, policy, political sciences, systems modeling, engineering, worked with the representatives of the federal departments of environment, natural resources, finance, fisheries, and agriculture in order to kind of develop and transfer the model to these departments for their policy making. This is the kind of high-level structure representation. The model currently has 12 different sectors, from climate, carbon, population, land use, to nutrient cycles, water supply, persistent pollution. And in different colors, if you can see on this slide, are the kind of intersectoral feedbacks. Each of the sectors is a very detailed now model in itself. It includes approximately 600-700 differential equations and state variables and uncounted number of feedback relationships. We came up to some estimate of over 8,000 feedbacks acting together in order to produce the kind of dynamic behavior of such a complex system. But the point was that we successfully kind of connected. Let's follow the red line, like the carbon sector, climate, food production, population, and then energy and economy that affects again the carbon. And you can follow the other colors and see how these different sectors interact between themselves, and by this interaction actually create that complex behavior. The model was validated, running it in the past and comparing to some available data. And you can see the dashed lines are the model performance, showing different variables here, and the full lines are observations. And the kind of verification period or validation period was between 1980 and 2020. And then we used the model to kind of run the future set of future scenarios. On these couple of slides, I'm showing also the comparison with different research outcomes that are also dealing with these longer term predictions. The key point in understanding this type of modeling is that the purpose of this type of model is not to tell us what, in 2053 what will be the concentration of the atmospheric CO2. No, it's actually to tell us what is the kind of trend that the atmospheric CO2 will be taking over the longer period of time as a consequence of the particular policy options, adaptation options, the behavioral options, so the population, industrial choices, and so on. So on the basis of this model, we developed a kind of user-friendly interface and provided this on the web for general public use. I'll try to see if I can successfully demonstrate the model. This is the address that the model can be kind of accessed. Okay, I think this should bring me into the model. Yes, this is the interface of the Global Kind of Change Explorer. There are very simple set of steps that the user can take to kind of simulate and run the model in real time on the web. The model or the Explorer has a number of scenarios that are already preloaded, dealing with the climate change, population, water security. And then within each of these scenarios, number of questions that by experimentation the user can answer. So let's say if I am interested into climate change, I can pose the question, what will be the impact of climate change or energy production, and select this particular kind of scenario. That will give me now the working environment. On the left-hand side, there is a so-called the summary graph that shows together a set of variables that are selected by ourselves to address the question that's being investigated. But in addition to this kind of set of combined information, we provide a very detailed information for almost all significant variables to that particular investigation. So these graphs are individual graphs showing, population, precipitation, energy production, carbon emissions, and so on. So the way how the model works is, on the right-hand side, you have a description of the kind of scenario that you are running. In the middle box, you have a description and definition of all the variables. Number of variables are preset with each of the scenario. These are the variables which are required as initial conditions for running the simulations. And the number of variables that the user can experiment with are provided on the right-hand side. So by using these sliders and modifying the values, the user can easily run the simulation. The model is now running in the real time, and it will now show the results of the simulation, which was consequence of selecting these input variables. I didn't select something drastic, but you will see there are actually two graphs now: the based conditions as well as the selected. Let's select something more drastic, like a very conservative climate change emissions scenario, RCP 8.5, rerun the simulation, and you will see model is again now simulating, and it will be presenting the results of this particular graph. Now we are observing much more significant differences. These differences are pointing out and being kind of saved in the background. Just to finish, the model stores the information for all the runs and simulations. They can be exported in the form of the Excel tables. They can be shared between different users. And also the the interface provides some kind of help through the access to user manual and the number of publications that are already available. So let me finish just to point out the direction we are going on from this kind of global modeling perspective. I am now very much interested in coming down to regional scales. About 10 days ago, we completed the model with a very similar structure, but focusing only on the Yangtze River Basin in China. The publications are in process, and I think very different type of interactions which are occurring on the regional scale are being kind of assessed. Theoretically, we are interested in the interaction between the processes occurring on different scales, like global processes like climate change, and regional processes like, let's say, economic decisions, investment decisions, or particular decisions related to, population or urbanization and so on. And the third kind of direction we are going on is expanding the Global Change Explorer by increasing basically the number of scenarios that are going to be available to the users. We are very much open for the feedback, looking forward to learn from the users what the interests are, what the opinions are about the current system, and obviously trying to tailor and build the tool to the level to be of interest to more people. With this, I'll be happy to answer some questions when we come to that part of the day. James, back to you.
Thank you so much, Slobodan. I listening to you and Sarah, listening to your presentations, I have this reoccurring sense as we work on this CAS lab group of consistently and constantly realizing I'm the slowest one in the room. The work that you are both doing is just remarkable, and yeah, really privileged just to yeah, to be able to support and share it in this small way.
Thank you.
Yeah, another I think somewhat maybe unique feature of the Complex Adaptive Systems Lab is the leadership and contribution that students have made. And in the next four presentations are reflections of some of just really remarkable undertakings that have been accomplished by undergraduates this year, this term and this year. So I will turn it over to Paige, Peter, Finn, and Jonathan to talk about the mapping project of the lab.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jonathan, and today Paige, Peter, Finn, and I will be presenting the results of our CAS Lab mapping project. So just a little bit of background about us. We're all fourth-year Scholars Elective students, and for our Community Engaged Learning course this year, we had the pleasure of working alongside James Shelley to create an interactive map that connects Western faculty members in the CAS Lab. So this was a really incredible learning experience for us to be able to bring this map to life, and we're really excited to share all the results with you. So now, without further ado, I'll pass it on to Peter to just explain a bit more about the goal of our project and how exactly we created our map.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. So I just want to start off giving you a broad overview of what the goal of our project was. And this begins with the broader goal of the CAS Lab in general, which is to bring together faculty across disciplines, departments, and Western affiliate organizations, which do research relating to complex adaptive systems and facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration. The goal of our team during the last 6 to 8 months was essentially to develop a tool which can help the CAS Lab actually facilitate that interdisciplinary collaboration. The way we ended up doing this was through developing a Kumu mapping, which is a visualization tool which takes in complex data and allows for the creation of a network, which highlights faculty members and their overlapping research interests, their overlapping departmental affiliations, and make this available to different faculty members in the CAS Lab and beyond, so that they can identify which faculty members might be best suited for them to reach out to or collaborate with in the future. To talk a little bit more about this and the tagging process, I'll pass it over to Paige.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, I'm just going to give you an example of the types of connections that we're trying to make through our mapping project. So here I just have an excerpt from the CAS Lab website of the descriptions of two of the members of the CAS Lab, Dr. Cristancho, who we heard from earlier, and Dr. D'Souza. So as we learned, Dr. Cristancho is involved with Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. Meanwhile, Dr. D'Souza is more involved with the Don Wright Faculty of Music at Western. However, both of their research has one central focus that is related to teams and how teams function. So as Dr. Cristancho mentioned in her presentation earlier, it's a lot about team adaptation and looking at how ICU teams and surgery teams can work effectively. Meanwhile, Dr. D'Souza is looking at how musical ensembles use collaboration to perform in a way that they can communicate with each other. So this is one of those connections in which, because of their very different research, they might not have previously known about each other's research projects. However, the hope is that with our map, both of them would be tagged as being part of teams research. So I'm going to pass back to Peter, who's going to be going through the different tagging processes that we went through in our project.
Thank you, Paige. So most of you in the audience might be wondering how we went about doing this, obviously given the various research interests of many of the faculty across Western. So on the screen, you can see a screenshot of our Excel spreadsheet, which essentially is a compilation of faculty members that are, a part of the CAS Lab, and there are many different research interests. So on the left-hand side, in the leftmost column, you can see the names of several faculty member. And as we progress from left to right, we get a lot more granular in what we are identifying. So you can see organization, faculty, department, and affiliations. And then we get to methodology, outcomes, and research interests, which really are the core of our project, in that we're identifying overlaps between faculty members in terms of their research methodology, their research outcomes, what they hope to actually get out of their research, or what impact they hope to make, as well as the several research interests and tags that they have. And on the next slide, we'll actually see kind of an overview of statistics. So here we can see the distribution, or some summary statistics of the faculty members across different Western organizations on the left-hand side. So we can see 77 members at Western, 8 at King's, 3 at Huron, and 0 at Brescia as of now, but hopefully in the near future, we'll be seeing much more Brescia professors and faculty members as a part of the CAS lab. Within our tagging process, we can see that we identified 79 unique departments and affiliations, and 191 unique research tags. This does not include research outcomes or methodology tags. So you can see the breadth of research that is being done at a high level, more abstracted level, is still so vast at Western University and its affiliate organizations. And on the right-hand side, you can kind of see a distribution of faculty members by their actual faculty affiliations, at least at main campus. So I'll pass it back to, I believe it's Paige, who will take it on from here.
I think that's me. Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to show you the first of our maps with Kumu. So one of the great features of Kumu is we get to take different views of our data to see how it's laid out. So this is our most general layout, the faculty distribution. And you can see that we have the members of the CAS lab organized around these central nodes, which represent their home faculties. So this provides a really good idea of the distribution of the members of the CAS lab and kind of the proportions of the faculties in Western generally. So on the next slide, we can give you a bit of a closer view to show you what's going on here. So we've highlighted here the Faculty of Social Science and the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. You can see all the various professors who are associated with each. So this is a good starting point if you're looking to do research within one of these faculties. And then we can see Dr. Neufeld and Dr. Frowen are cross-appointed between these two faculties, which again gives you a good starting point for looking for connections within the CAS lab.
Yeah, so like Finn mentioned, a really cool aspect of the Kumu maps is that they can be filtered to reveal different views of our data. So here you can see our second view, which is the research methodology view. And that really displays connections between faculty members on the basis of shared research methodologies. As you can see, this view is a little bit more complex and interwoven compared to the faculty view. And there are more opportunities for connections because of that. In order to generate this view, what we did is we assigned 1 or 2 tags to each faculty member, just describing the methodology or type of research that they generally conduct. And examples of these tags include, computational research, clinical research, and qualitative research, among others. And in this close-up view here, so we're going to focus a little bit on the qualitative research tag, which is one of our most common tags, actually. So there's a lot of connections here. And as you can see, the qualitative research tag is in the middle, and it kind of serves as a central hub that connects a variety of other methodologies. And these include, pedagogy, behavior analysis, which is a lot of faculty members in psychology, observational research, and policy analysis, among others. So in this way, the qualitative research tag serves as a really, really strong potential point of connection for a very large number of faculty members. And because methodology is such an important part of research, being able to identify these points of connection is really promising, and we're excited about that.
And then moving on, this is our third and final view of the faculty members in the CAS lab, which is probably the coolest, which is the research topics. So you can see here all the different research tags that professors that are part of the faculty or part of the CAS lab are involved with, and even more so, it is interwoven than the methodology or faculty tags. So I'm just going to go back to that example that I was looking at earlier with the teams tag. So with that view of the research interest, you can search specific research tags. So in this case, I just pulled up the teams one. And as you can see here by the different colors of faculty members, this is a tag that is shared by a wide variety of faculty members at Western, including Dr. Cristancho and Dr. D'Souza, who I mentioned earlier. And then another way that you can view the research interest tags is by finding specific faculty members. So again, using those two as an example, we can see Dr. Cristancho has been tagged with surgery, intensive care unit, and healthcare. Meanwhile, Dr. D'Souza has been paired with psychology, music, teams, neuroscience. So you can use this to be able to find other professors and then which research interests that might be outside of your area they're also involved with to get a better idea of what kind of things they do with their research. So with that, I'm going to move along to Finn to review our next steps as the lab.
Thanks, Paige. So our project is starting to come to an end now, and we're just wrapping up a few final points. The first of these is to continue to incorporate your feedback as CAS Lab faculty members. The map has now been published on the CAS Lab website, and I believe James has shared it around with the faculty. So we encourage you all to take a look at yourselves and the tags we've attached to you, and then please let us know if one of them doesn't apply, if you'd like to be attached to another one, and we'll be continuing to make those updates. We're also looking to continue to update the map with new faculty members as they join the CAS Lab. And to that end, we're hoping to set up some sort of automated process involving the existing survey that you complete when you join the CAS Lab. And I believe that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and we're happy to take any questions in the Q&A period.
Thank you, team. It's been a big project. You guys have done a terrific job in pulling the pieces together. I think what you've developed here is a terrific tool that can be accessed when the question arises. I need a collaborator with X skill, with X interest in X faculty who kind of speaks the complexity language. There are often student projects that are made and then go sit on shelves, but this is certainly not one of those projects. And two, to mention, I think you said this too, but just to highlight that this data set's dynamic, we can update it. It updates in real time on the database backend. So a terrific tool that I think is going to be really core to the ongoing work of the lab in this collaborative and ongoing work of finding these connections. So thank you. Our next presenter will be Emma. Emma's a fourth-year practicum placement here with us from the School of Health Studies. And her and Siobhan and Amira will all be sharing some distinct, but I think related thoughts on how their experiences has shifted and informed their perspective on complexity. So Emma, take it over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emma, and I'm a practicum student at the CAS Lab this school year. And doing my practicum, I've had the opportunity for myself to learn about complex adaptive systems. And I was also able to create an OWL-based site of modules intended for new lab members and students to use as an introduction to complex systems with my practicum peers. And today I hope I can convince you to incorporate CAS thinking into the courses you teach. So here's just a quick overview of what I'll be discussing. We'll start with why teaching students about CAS is so important and finish off with some practical points on how to approach teaching complex adaptive systems. So why teach undergraduates about complex adaptive systems? And to begin, I'll start with an anecdote about my undergraduate experience. When I came to Western, starting in health sciences, it was interdisciplinary right off the bat. My first required courses were biology, personal determinants of health, and social determinants of health. And as I went through the program, I was taking electives in a variety of medical and social science subjects, and my health science courses continue to discuss health as an intersectional issue. And in 4 years, an undergraduate like myself will learn a lot of information between all their courses with no real discussion on how to connect these ideas. As I have learned what it means to use a complex systems lens this year, I've really been equipped to apply what I've learned to the rest of my studies. And I find myself looking for the big picture and find the overlap between courses. And from there, I'm able to visualize elements of a single issue that will influence other elements, or finding underlying problems within a single issue. And by having the knowledge of a complex systems framework, it's really a legitimate way to define or describe those relationships. So in most cases, the goal of teaching CAS in the undergraduate classroom should really be to show students how to make those connections and distinguish relationships between topics that overlap in between their courses. Because complex theory as one thing can be really tricky, but the main idea should really be able to show how complex problems can be interdisciplinary, and to solve these problems, you need to consider a wide range of solutions, and directly showing how complex systems thinking can be applied to their area of study can be really beneficial. So students don't have to find ways to make their own connections. CAS thinking gives them a formal way of thinking through complex problems, because in today's world, students are going to enter the workforce and work with groups of people that are multidisciplinary. And so students that understand what complex adaptive systems are will really set them up for success. So when my peers and I started developing the OWL modules, our first course of action was to find a way to present the information so that it was interesting and digestible to the students. So we also had the opportunity to pilot test the modules with our community engaged learning groups and got a lot of great feedback. And so here would be a few of my recommendations. The first is that complicated terminology should be presented clearly and in a way students can really comprehend. Complex theory can seem really abstract if there's no way to demonstrate through the application of these terms using an example to guide through learning complex adaptive systems thinking. So using meaningful examples is really important. There are lots of videos and virtual simulations that students can watch to stay engaged with content and see in real time how complex systems work and change. As well, videos and simulations are a great tool to change how students different sources of media. And we included quizzes at the end of each module to allow students to test their knowledge and gauge their understanding. When doing my own self-directed learning at the start of my practicum, I personally found it difficult to see if I was grasping the concepts of CAS myself. So we found the quizzes to be really helpful with that. So here's just some screenshots of the OWL site. Using checklists was a really helpful way to stay on track. And we also received a lot of feedback to include learning objectives for each module to direct focus onto the main ideas of each section. So to the left, you can see module 1, and on the right, you can see the 5 modules and how they were set up, first with introducing systems and complexity, and then moving to videos and simulations that had applications. And here's a screenshot of module 4. We offered videos to address wide interests, since students can join the lab from any field, and obviously not just health science. So we included a video on Earth systems, economics, and simulations on evolution, social networks, and COVID. But the CAS website has links to courses or course subjects that range in topic areas. So if you're looking for a place to start when introducing complexity theory, the resources section on the CAS Lab website is really helpful. And here are just two of the simulations that we included in the OWL site, one about social networks and one about COVID. And my practicum peers will be looking at these applications in detail a little bit later. And the final point I wish to make is the importance of educators in complex adaptive systems. To introduce students to complex systems, we must first convince course instructors to want to do so and ensure they know how CAS can be applied to their course topics, which is what I'm doing today with you. So I encourage all of you here today to consider adding a complexity lens to your course and urge some of your colleagues to maybe do the same. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Emma, Amira, and Siobhan all worked on the module project, and tagging the CAS Lab modules as another student project that is definitely going to live on in its applicability and usability. We've tested it already a few times with new students coming in to the lab to take on work, having them run through the modules, and it just creates a great base one for getting everyone kind of on the same page for moving forward. Siobhan will pick up the thread from Emma's presentation.
One second. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Siobhan, and today I will be giving you a brief overview of my topic, explaining complex adaptive systems using social groups. Following Emma's presentation on teaching CAS, I think this is a good real-life example that illustrates complex adaptive systems. So during my time, I'll be touching on three main aspects, the first being my experience learning CAS, then explaining CAS using social groups, and finally media technology in CAS itself. So starting at the CAS lab, as Emma mentioned, our first task was to understand CAS so collectively we could teach others. And it's safe to say that I found this incredibly challenging because this concept is very abstract and it requires a different perspective of learning that I haven't been conditioned to in an academic setting for a long time, probably in the past decade or so. This was my first time hearing about these group of words together, being complex adaptive systems. And there are two instances where I felt like this emoji with its head exploding. The first instance was when I was trying to understand the terms itself. And since I had no prior knowledge, this would be really challenging. And secondly, my head exploded again when I started to understand the different elements that make up a complex adaptive system. And when I saw these elements in action in the real world, I got a true understanding of the connectedness of the world that we lived in. So initially, when I was first asked to choose a topic to write about for complex adaptive systems, I felt very stuck and I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go in. So I took a step back and I started to observe things around me to hopefully spark an interest and have that light bulb moment. While doing this, I realized that individually, humans are complex adaptive systems themselves. And to further add to complexity, the way we actually interact with others in social groups is also complex. What I was drawn to about this topic was the generalizability of social groups. And what I mean by this is that everyone has had some sort of social relationship experience with another person, so readers would be able to relate more easily. After doing some research and an introspective look at the social groups and relationships that I have, it became apparent that social groups display each component of complex adaptive systems. And just to be mindful of the time that we have here today, I'll only highlight a couple elements such as semi-autonomous, interdependent, and unpredictability. A more in-depth review and overview of these components are actually explained in the article themselves if you do want to take a read later on. But semi-autonomous refers to the fact that within a group, our behavior is governed by group expectations and rules. However, the autonomous aspect of this element indicates that humans, as humans, we have free will to make personal decisions about our behavior. And sometimes this behavior goes against the group expectations and rules. Interdependent is another component of CAS where while we are semi-autonomous agents, our individual actions do have an impact on the entire group and they can influence one another. And finally, unpredictability builds off of semi-autonomous in the sense that since agents are autonomous in their behaviors, that also makes them unpredictable. There are many internal and external factors that influence how an individual behaves in any given moment. So as you can see, as we start to unpack these different elements that compose a complex adaptive system, they can be easily identified in any social group. So not only is in-person social relationships complex, but when you add in media and technology into the mix, yet again, another layer of complexity is also added. So humans by definition are social beings with the drive to create connections and relationships. And one key way of doing this is by spreading information. They have done this throughout history with the intervention of the printing press, telegrams, and more recently, the internet and social media. With each new edition, these changes the way that humans interact with each other. So especially in terms of social media, this leads me to question if the definition of friends change. Is it someone who you physically met, like a former high school classmate, or is it someone you regularly engage with, or even how does someone you only virtually engage with fit into these social groups? Unfortunately, I don't have these answers, but it's a very interesting concept to consider.
And to briefly touch on the greatest catalyst of change that we've all been experiencing right now, being the COVID-19 pandemic, this has significantly complicated friendships and the maintenance of friendships. There's no more, or at least very few, spontaneous run-ins with friends. Everything is now more scheduled Zoom calls, FaceTimes, or texting. I think that this has again changed the nature of friendships. I also think that the time alone has allowed for individuals to reflect on the foundations that keep friendships together. So throughout my presentation, I hope you've gotten a good idea at how complex adaptive systems can be found everywhere, especially in social groups. And to further solidify that the connectedness of our world, these friendships and friend groups do not exist within a vacuum. There are external factors that have an impact on friendships, how we interact, and how we form relationships that further contribute to complexity. So the link to the full post is on the slide, and thank you guys for your attention.
Thank you, Amira. And as everyone listening in can probably tell, the question of how can we creatively and clearly communicate complexity was a guiding question, especially throughout the last term of our work together. And it's when Siobhan brought up the idea of like, okay, well, let's just use social groups as an example. Everyone's in one, everyone can relate to them on some level. Is a great way of, especially in terms of communicating the concepts of complex adaptive systems with undergraduates and who themselves are at a very kind of tumultuous time in their relational world, often when coming to university for the first time and exploring new friendships. It was a great idea. It was a great idea, Siobhan. Thank you for diving into that topic and exploring it and coalescing those ideas for us. Our final presentation is by our final health studies practicum student this term, which is Amira. Take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you, James. It's been amazing to hear about all of the work that's being done around the CAS lab. So I'm excited to share with you one of the projects that I worked on this semester as a practicum student at the CAS lab. So I'll be talking about Canada's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how public health interventions exemplify a complex adaptive system. So throughout my presentation, I'll be discussing some features of complexity theory that are represented within public health interventions, as well as how Canada's COVID-19 response exemplifies a complex system by unpacking some of the different programs, policies, and guidelines that have been implemented over the past year. So as a health sciences student, I had never learned about complexity theory. In fact, when I started my practicum placement at the CAS lab last fall, that was the first time I had ever heard of the term. So as I started to learn more about complex adaptive systems, I started to connect it to things that I was passionate about, as well as concepts that I was learning about in my classes. So two disciplines that stood out to me were health policy and public health, and the complexity rooted within these domains. So given that we are currently living through a global pandemic, I really wanted to try and piece all of these aspects together. So first, I'm going to talk about two features of complexity theory that are prominent within public health interventions, even though we may not realize it. So the first one is emergence, which is defined as individual components that interact in a wider context. For example, chronic disease is an emergent property of genetics, social class, eating patterns, physical activity, etc. And all of these factors contribute to the incidence of chronic disease. Next, we're going to talk about adaptation, which is defined as adjustments in behavior in response to public health interventions. For example, the health warning labels on tobacco products may encourage people to make adjustments in their behavior. So the public health interventions implemented as a result of Canada's COVID-19 response exemplify a complex adaptive system. We typically apply linear models of cause and effect to explain health outcomes, but public health challenges that emerge as a complex system can't be solved with a single intervention. So the range of policies, programs, and guidelines implemented as a result of the pandemic demonstrate the challenge of intervening within a complex system. So this word cloud represents a handful of examples that demonstrate the interdisciplinarity of Canada's COVID-19 response. This multifaceted approach encompasses policies and programs that cater to different population groups. So if we look at some examples, financial support encompasses the range of government subsidies that were available at the onset of the pandemic, and digital tools would include the COVID Alert app, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. If we take a step back, it's critical to understand the underlying factors that reinforce the importance of applying a multifaceted approach when intervening in a complex system. So many external factors contribute to shaping an individual's overall health and experiences. So, in other words, health inequities arise from unequal access to social and personal determinants of health. The conditions in which people live and work lead to differences in exposure, susceptibility, and treatment of COVID-19. These factors result in disparities with respect to morbidity and mortality rates for varying demographic groups. For example, occupational factors such as the ability to work from home would reduce an individual's exposure to the virus, and biological factors such as underlying health conditions increase an individual's susceptibility of experiencing adverse health outcomes from COVID-19. So this adds another layer of complexity rooted within the personal and social determinants of health. Moving forward from the pandemic, we'll notice several shifts in the way our societies function, as we've developed an increased awareness of disease and the need to accommodate for evolving public health measures. So these changes exemplify a systems thinking approach and are rooted in various social domains. Some developments may include the reconfiguration of long-term care facilities, travel restrictions based on immunization, or even an increase in telemedicine. Lastly, I hope to reinforce the idea that leveraging complexity within public health interventions and reinforcing intersectoral collaboration will enable Canada to be better equipped to respond to future health crises. Moving forward, our ability to harness interdisciplinarity and apply a complexity lens to the implementation of public health interventions must be considered in order to create a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. I encourage you to check out the articles that Emma, Siobhan, and I have written on our respective topics. They're all linked on the CAS website. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Amira. And we've had so many conversations over the last term, in thinking about, even how COVID-19 has impacted, our work as a group. It's impacted the way that student placements have happened. It's impacted obviously just about every feature, facet of our life. And as a way of thinking about complexity, we've often marveled this term in conversations that it's just remarkable that the world we're living in is a result of somewhere in the world at one point a cell divided and it changed everything. And it's such a rich example and illustration of the interconnections of complexity to stop and pause in the current moment and to analyze it from that lens. So if there are any people that have questions for any of the presenters, I invite you to come forward and go ahead. And I don't see any hands raised as I'm cycling through this, and I realize we're a little bit over time. Sarah, if I can just come back to you real quick on your first presentation and the whole idea of distributed leadership within a team environment. How do humans manage to do this given our ego?
Well, great question on the topic, because one of the industries who do this or who does this better is the military industry, which by itself has a very strong hierarchy. that they are sometimes very unwilling to challenge. Yet, when they go into deployment scenarios, that's where it is allowed. So it's not that every single industry across different dimensions are able to implement this kind of thinking, but in certain moments or in certain applications, it is possible. For the military industry, it happens very clearly in deployment scenarios. And it is based on that idea of interchangeability that I was explaining about, or collective self-healing, because they know that they have to put at the forefront of their goal the safety of the team before anything else. So when something happens and somebody goes down, the team has to rearrange themselves in order to be able to continue. And that rearrangement includes also the swapping of the leadership role depending on who's available, who is perceiving what. So to your point, it is possible. And my perspective is that we can look to other examples outside our own industries to learn from each other. And that's what I'm hoping to do in this next phase of the research. Like one of the participants called it a cross-pollination of ideas. And I love that term because it's really a cross-pollination, how we can learn. It's not to say that one industry is better than other. That's not the point, because every industry has different goals and expectations, but it's how we can actually leverage lessons from each other.
Yeah, that's terrific. And the example of like how in an operating room environment, even having, you know, a culture where the org chart doesn't preclude, you know, information moving in a certain direction, you know, as a way to, that seemed like a valuable example of thinking, okay, well, obviously everyone in the OR room is not a doctor,
right?
So everyone can't perform that task. So then how information moves becomes the crucial question.
Right, and that the movement of information is the key part to allow whoever is in charge of the leadership role to actually enact whatever is necessary. And one of the topics that, for instance, one of my colleagues, Dr. Taryn Taylor, is doing is the idea of not only speaking up, like the people in the bottom part of the totem pole just speaking up, but also listening down. How the leaders have to also be able to listen for the people around, regardless of the degree or regardless of the role that they are playing, and how speaking up and listening down can be put together in order to enable a team to better communicate.
That's great. Thank you so much. Emma, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, I know the CEL Group's map hasn't really been out for that long for available to professors, but for any of you who have had the opportunity to look at the map, that I know you use Dr. Cristancho's like Teams focus as an example. Like, have you been able to find faculty members that you didn't realize were doing similar research yet by using the map?
Like in my case, I have to be honest, I haven't used the map, but I have had leveraged the group and the connections and the people in the group to find collaborators. So one person that I was able to connect with is a person who is both a physician and an astronaut. And that person allowed me to get into the industry of extreme explorer environments. So I'm leveraging some of the people in the group who I can connect with. And I also got a connection during this talk. Rishi, I think I'm pronouncing his name probably wrong, but he was interested, and I didn't know about pediatric intensive care units. That will be a very interesting environment to do this work with. So now this event by itself is allowing me to start making connections and I'm going to go back to the map for sure, just to connect, because some of the ideas, the methodologies is an intriguing one for me. I'm a qualitative researcher, but I'm interested in seeing how can I connect with people doing research in different paradigms, because I think it's the complementary of methodologies that can make us stronger. So I will go back particularly for that aspect in my case.
Yeah, great, thank you.
James, if you allow me, I would like to make a comment or ask a question.
Oh, please do.
Okay. I really admire the effort and the kind of goal of the CAS to put people together to connect through this idea of complex adaptive system theory, and also support the interdisciplinary research at the university. Being probably the oldest person on the call, I have dose of, or let's say, maybe more warning message. There are a lot of obstacles. There are a lot of obstacles in our structure, in the organization of the institution, in the organization of the role of the university to really doing interdisciplinary work. Unfortunately, we are, in silos of the faculties, and then within the faculties of the departments, and within the departments in our research areas, and so on. So any attempt to kind of do the real interdisciplinary work it's very demanding. I've been for a long time at university. I had a number of very large projects. And I can tell you, I worked with, I am an engineer by training, and I was co-advising the student in political science. And I can tell you that in some of the projects, we were spending probably 50, 60% of our time to actually adjust the language, how we talk to each other, to actually realize that we may be talking about the same things, but using completely different terminology. And I like the idea of using the kind of systems. I would go even more basic than Emma's ideas in the undergraduate course, to use the kind of systems thinking as a procedure, as a methodology to bring into our disciplinary training. So that kind of systems view of the disciplines or disciplinary work becomes something that can connect us with, more efficiently and with a greater potential success. There are issues with the funding agencies. I had a very large interdisciplinary project which were simply falling between the cracks, because no one topic or discipline was kind of, or the proposals were not fitting with, and so on. So just a kind of caution how to proceed, and maybe finding the way to kind of support a little bit different approach of the communication, the kind of horizontal communication between different faculties, between different disciplines in the future.
Those are great points, great insights, and I feel one of the lessons from the last year and a half, 2 years has been, this is probably going to be very iterative, and it will probably be very experiment and reflect and dance between the praxis and the practice. I think in terms of addressing, some of those systemic and structural challenges. Yeah, and I won't name names, but I was just browsing through the list of people who are still in the room, and I know there are a couple others who have long sought to champion complexity, systems thinking, in the institution, and to use that as a way for us to speak to one another across and between silos. And I think I have a lot to learn from the work that others have taken up too. But I agree. I agree, Salvador, 100%. I think we're gonna fumble around, I think, for a while. All right. Well, seeing no other questions, and seeing, as we said, that this thing was going to end 17 minutes ago, I don't want anyone to feel compelled or obliged to stick around. So if anyone has any other thoughts or questions, or would like to connect with anyone else who presented, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to help connect dots, and obviously everyone's listed on the website as well for that reason. So I will bid everyone a lovely Monday evening. Thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you in person as soon as possible. It would be great to reconnect in real life again. So, or on Zoom, we'll see what happens.
Thanks for organizing this, James.
Thank you, James.
Thanks all for
Thank
presenting.
you. Thanks for coming,
Thanks,
Jackie.
James.
Thank you.